السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Dear viewers, welcome back to a new episode as we continue to delve into on this journey of Hajj, the Fiqh of Hajj. Alhamdulillah, last episode we finished discussing the virtues of the last 10 days, or the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, and this episode we will dive into the topic on hand, the Hajj itself. Now we'll begin, Shaykhna, with your permission, of course, with the different types of Hajj. There are different types of Hajj out there. So, in general, can you just explain to us what are the different types of Hajj?
Bismillah. What I'd like to say is that when you said, and this what happened to me quite a few years ago, and they said, what type of Hajj are you going to make? I said, I thought Hajj was Hajj. What do you mean types of Hajj? There's only one Hajj. They said, no, there is one Hajj. But there's different ways that you can perform the Hajj. I said, subhanAllah, I didn't know that. So maybe the viewers are hearing. Similarly, my reaction is, I thought there was only one Hajj. There is only one Hajj. However, there are different ways to perform the Hajj. In fact, there are three. Quite simply, there is something called Hajj al-Ifrad. Hajj al-Ifrad means to perform the Hajj alone. That's it, you're just performing the rites of Hajj. The second one you have is called Hajj al-Qiran. Well, that means that you're going to perform Umrah with the Hajj. The third Hajj is called Hajj al-Tamattu', which is also Hajj with Umrah. Now you're thinking, that's the same as the one previous. So what is the difference between Qiran and Tamattu'? First of all, let's explain the terms. Hajj means Hajj. Ifrad means alone, singular. That's what that means. So Hajj alone. Hajj Qiran from the word qaruna, which means to join together. Okay, it means to be together. This means that a person is going to perform Hajj and Umrah with one ihram. So the Hajj is going to be performed and an Umrah, or it's going to count for an Umrah at least, and you're not going to come out of ihram. You stay in ihram. The third one is Tamattu'. Tamattu' means to enjoy. This means that you're going to perform Umrah and Hajj. However, you're going to have two ihrams. It means that you're going to perform the Umrah separately, and then you're going to perform the Hajj separately. So the Tamattu' differs from the Qiran in that the Hajj and Umrah for Tamattu' are performed individually. The Qiran, they're done together.
Jameel, Shaykh. SubhanAllah, we covered a lot in these few minutes over here, so I want to break things down a little bit so maybe we can understand a little bit more in detail. So in Hajj al-Qiran, we mentioned that we're performing both Hajj and Umrah together with one ihram. So there's no cutting of the hair or taking off of the ihram. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So just one straight.
So yeah, I mean, bringing it down further, there's a link between how the Hajj al-Ifrad is performed to the Hajj al-Qiran. Essentially, it's the same rites. It's the same way you're going to do it, except with the Qiran, there is a sacrifice that is made. So the rites of how you perform Hajj Ifrad is the same as how you perform Hajj Qiran. But with the Hajj Qiran, we said that you also get the reward of an Umrah with it. But you have to make a sacrifice as well. With Hajj Ifrad, there is no sacrifice. The sacrifice means that you have a sheep, or you participate with a cow or a camel. There's no sacrifice for Hajj Ifrad. One ihram, perform Hajj, and you're done. With Qiran, you're going to perform Hajj with the reward of an Umrah, and a sacrifice is made.
Because we didn't do Ifrad.
Not because we didn't, it's because at the beginning, when you make your intention, which we'll talk about later, how to perform or enter the state of Ihram, you'll make your intention. And your intention will determine the type of Hajj that you make, and then what is upon you, whether you make a sacrifice or not. With Tamattu', you perform Umrah in Mecca, of course. No other place you're going to perform Umrah. Then you come out of the state of Ihram. You finished your Umrah. Alhamdulillah, you trimmed or shaved your hair. Then you stay in Mecca, and when the days of Hajj begin, you then perform Hajj. So you have that kind of gap between performing the Umrah and the Hajj. That gap could be one day, it could be a month, depending on when you performed that particular Umrah.
Hence the name tamattu'.
Yeah, you enjoy your time there.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Jazakallah khair.
No.
So can we look at it as in terms of, for example, an express Hajj for those, for example, who don't have the time to do the ifrad, for example, versus those who have time, they can come in, they do the umrah and have that relaxation time, that tamattu', the enjoyment of Mecca and the haram, and then do the Hajj, or?
Well, it really depends when you're going to assume your ihram. If you're living in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and you have the kind of you have the liberty of entering your ihram just before Hajj starts, then that's something can be facilitated. It's easy for you to do that. However, if you're flying in from a different country, you will be required to enter a number of days, maybe a week or 10 days before Hajj actually starts. So that means if you're going to do ifrad, you need to remain in the state of ihram, your state of ihram, because you're performing ifrad. You're going to remain in the state of ihram for a week or 10 days, which is a little bit difficult. Okay, this is why most people who are flying in from abroad to come in to perform their Hajj, most of them perform tamattu'. Because when they arrive, they can perform their umrah, they can then wear their normal clothes, and when it's time to perform Hajj, they enter the ihram for a second time for the Hajj, and they perform their Hajj. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's a quick way for those who are flying from a different country, because if you're flying from a different country, you need to arrive early. But for those who are living close to Mecca, yeah, maybe it's a quicker way, an easier way for them, and it's obviously there's no sacrifice for you, so there's no financial burden for you to have a sacrifice. So it really depends on the circumstance of the individual.
What about somebody who's like flying in like on the 7th day, or he doesn't necessarily not have any time to perform a umrah at that point? He has to go straight into.
Yeah. So as far as the logistics, the practicalities of that, people who are from abroad, I think there's a cut-off date.
Okay.
That you don't find there are flights flying in on the 7th, like literally the one day before Hajj starts. That the logistical situation doesn't permit that due to safety reasons and whatnot. I think the last time that you can fly in, it differs from each year, maybe is 4 or 5 days before Hajj actually starts. If you're within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it differs because you can drive quite close to the place as long as you have permission to perform Hajj.
Of course.
Okay, and then you can enter Mecca to perform your Hajj.
MashaAllah. Going back to Shaykhna, the Hajj al-Qiran, Hajj al-Tamattu'. How long can somebody have that tamattu' phase? Can it be an hour or two, or can it be a day or two? Okay,
good. So this is going back to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, where al-Hajju ashhurun ma'lumat, that the Hajj are specific months. Now what are these months? What are the months of Hajj? They are Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah. So let's say, for example, a person intends to make the Hajj and performs their Umrah in the month of Shawwal. So they perform their Umrah in the Shawwal and they stay in Mecca. And mashallah, maybe 2 months later they're going to perform their Hajj. Here it could be 2 months between their Umrah and their Hajj. Those people who are maybe coming from the Americas, maybe coming from Africa, coming from Europe, they will arrive in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia maybe a week before Hajj starts. So they will perform their Umrah upon arrival. Most groups, some groups come earlier, some come later, but average. They will perform their Umrah and maybe it's 5 or 6 or 7 days before their Hajj. So it really depends on when you perform your Umrah, as long as it's within Shawwal or Dhul Qa'dah, or the first 10 days, or the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah.
SubhanAllah. So it could be anywhere from 2 months to 2 days to 2 hours.
It could be, yeah. It could be as short as that, yeah.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. So after performing, Hajj al-Tamattu' or Hajj al-Ifrad, I mean, obviously, if it's Ifrad, you're done with your Hajj, or you're finishing off your Hajj at that point, correct?
That's right. There's nothing for you to do after that. I know there's a common question as to which one is better for me to do. What's more preferable? Should I do this one? Should I do that one? Or should I do that? Okay. This is a big discussion amongst the scholars. Even some of the companions radiallahu anhum saw the matter in a different way. Some of them said ifrad is the best. Some of them said qiran is the best because that's what the Prophet ﷺ said did. And some of them say no, tamattu is best. And each of them have their understandings and evidences for everything. But what seems to be based upon the evidences, there seems to be a fair justification to say it's not necessarily one that is the best, and Allah knows best. Those who travel with their sacrifice, they say, some of the scholars, that qiran is best for you. Because that's what the Prophet ﷺ did. If you travel with your sacrifice, but this is something which is not many people do at the moment. You don't travel from the miqat and have the sheep in the back of the car or the bus. People don't do that anymore. So if you travel with your sacrifice, that's best for you. If you don't travel with your sacrifice, then what is better for you is tamattu, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is best.
Shaykhna, jazakumullah khairan. Dear viewers, unfortunately we've come to a break where we have to take a break at this point. Stay tuned for our next part of this episode after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear viewers, welcome back to this episode as we continue of our explanation of finding out the types of Hajj, the ways we can perform Hajj. As the Shaykh Hafidhahu mentioned, that there is only one type, there's only one Hajj to be performed, but there are different ways we can actually perform this Hajj. And we left off before the break talking about what is the best type or the best way among these Hajj. Shaykhna, what is, in a little bit more detail, the best type?
Bismillah. What I would say first and foremost is for the viewers is maybe to look at the first part of the show again, and just to take in fully the different types of Hajj. Okay, and what is Hajj Ifrad, what is Hajj Qiran, and what is Hajj Tamattu'? What are they, and what are the differences between those three types of performing the Hajj? This is very important to go over so you understand what's upon you, what's in front of you in this journey, inshallah ta'ala. After you've done that, I would say, answering your question, as to what is preferable and what is the best Hajj. Now, there are legitimate and valid differences of opinion on this. Some of the scholars are of the view that the Qiran, Hajj Qiran, is the best Hajj. This was the Hajj that the Prophet ﷺ performed. He brought along with him the sacrifice that was going to be made and performed Qiran. Now, some of the companions of the Messenger ﷺ saw the type of Hajj that he was performed, and they followed him, they did the same as him. However, when it was very close to Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ realized that some of the companions had brought their sacrifice with them, and some of them did not bring their sacrifice with them. So here the Prophet ﷺ said that if I knew before what was going to happen now, I would have done differently. So therefore, those who did not bring their sacrifice with them, those who were performing the Qiran, and they didn't have their sacrifice with them, he ﷺ said, right, what you're going to do now is you perform your Umrah. You're going to make it a Tamattu'. You don't perform Qiran, you perform Tamattu'. So you perform, because they didn't bring the sacrifice with them. So you perform your Umrah, you come out of Ihram, and then once again you will enter the state of Ihram and perform Hajj separately. This is Hajj Tamattu'. So for this reason, some of the scholars say no. Even though the Prophet ﷺ did perform Qiran, he ﷺ said that if I knew about what I knew in the future, I wouldn't have done like this. Therefore he said, ﷺ, he would have performed Tamattu'. For some reason, for this reason I should say, that some of the scholars say no, Tamattu' is better than Qiran. How, as I mentioned earlier, there is, some of the scholars have a just view in the middle, that if you do bring your sacrifice with you, then perform Qiran, that is better. If you don't bring your sacrifice with you, which is maybe the vast majority of people, then the Tamattu' would be better for you. It is not an issue for us to say, I've done this Hajj and my Hajj is better than yours. Just remember the Prophet ﷺ said, Al-Hajjul Mabrur, the Hajj that is accepted, not the Hajj Qiran that is accepted, or the Hajj Tamattu' that is accepted. Al-Hajj, the accepted one, laysa lahu al-jaza'u al-jannah, has no other reward except the paradise. So there's no need for us to argue over what happens to be the best. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala writes for you to perform Hajj, be thankful to your Lord and perform the Hajj, whatever Hajj you're performing. in the very best way that you can. That is the most important thing. Wallahu a'lam.
I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us all a Hajj and Mabrur.
Allahumma ameen.
Allahumma ameen. For those of us who are going out this year and those who are staying and didn't get that opportunity, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to write for us a Hajj in the near future. Allahumma ameen. So Shaykhna, from your explanation, what I can understand, and forgive me if I misunderstood, that the Hajj Qiran and Hajj Ifrad are very close to each other.
That's
in
right.
fact, they're all very close, but more
Yeah.
specifically, Qiran and Ifrad
Yes.
are very close. What is the main difference between them?
So the difference essentially between Hajj Ifrad, which we said is the Hajj alone, and the Hajj Qiran is the performing of Hajj, but the reward of Hajj and Umrah, but it has a sacrifice done with it, and you will stay in the state of Ihram. So as we will mention a little bit later about the pillars or the essential parts of the Hajj, there are 4. That is entering the state of Ihram, there is the standing on Arafah, there is the Tawaf al-Ifadah, and there is Sa'i. These are the 4 pillars of the Hajj. They are in both the Hajj Ifrad and also the Hajj of the Qiran. So when a person undertakes the pilgrimage, leaves the place where they entered the state of Ihram, make their way to Mecca, upon arrival, they will perform Tawaf al-Qudum. I will explain this a little bit later in the Sifah, or the explanation of the Hajj itself. But answering the question very specifically is that the rites of the Hajj Ifrad and the Qiran, that they are the same. However, with the Qiran, they will have to have a sacrifice made for them. That is the essential difference between the two.
So why would one choose Qiran over Ifrad?
Well, if they want to have the reward of a Hajj and Umrah.
Okay.
If they want to have the reward of a Hajj and Umrah, then they will have the Hajj Qiran performed, but they will have to make and pay for sacrifice. Because with the Hajj there is no sacrifice, there's no financial burden concerning that. But with the Qiran there is the financial burden of having an animal sacrificed. If you can't afford it, maybe a person doesn't have that, then you fast 3 days in Hajj. There's kind of another way of doing it. You fast, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in Surah Al-Baqarah, that if a person doesn't have the hadi, the sacrifice, they fast 3 days in the Hajj, وَسَبْعَةٌ إِذَا رَجَعْتُمْ, and 7 days when you return to your home. تِلْكَ عَشَرَةٌ كَامِلَةٌ. That is a complete 10 days. That would have 10 days of fasting, which would suffice the hadi, or the sacrifice that was made for you during the Hajj. If you can't afford it financially, then you can fast in place of that.
Jazakallah khair. Going back to Hajj al-Tamattu and that period of Tamattu, and inshallah we're going to be going in another episode perhaps of what are things that we're not allowed to do while we're in the state of Ihram. But what are we able to do in that phase or that stage of Tamattu, that phase of enjoyment? Are we allowed to, for example, have relations with our spouses during that time?
Sure.
What are we allowed and what are we not allowed to?
So again, and this is very important when studying fiqh, is that you can make tasawwur, is that you can imagine and visualize the topic that we are talking about. This is extremely important. Otherwise it just becomes just theory, pieces of information that remain in the mind for a little while and then it just goes away, because maybe Hajj is something that maybe you'll only do once in your life and you'll forget about those things. So as usual, during Ramadan, you always get Ramadan questions. They asked the question last year, but they forgot, so they need to ask again. Likewise, zakah. It comes once a year, you forget the answer, I need to ask again. So a lot of questions, maybe you can ask it once, you get the answer, and then you don't need to ask again, because you're always doing it now. So when a person performs their Umrah, they remain in Mecca, however long that is, 1 week or 1 month. You are not in the state of Ihram. If you're with your family, you have relations with your wife, you spend time in the Haram, which is the most important thing.
Of course.
Okay, we know that the Prophet ﷺ informed us that offering the Salah in the Masjid is equal to 100,000 Salah anywhere else. 100,000 Salah is times more than any other place on earth, subhanAllah. So you're in your own home, whether you're in Africa or Europe, the Americas, I guess 1 Salah is 1 Salah. In Mecca it's 100,000. On this issue, if I don't mind me mentioning,
please,
is this reward restricted to the masjid itself? Okay, the doors of the masjid, because this is how a masjid is known, by its walls and its doors.
Of course.
Is the reward restricted to that place? or is the reward anywhere in Mecca? There are two views on this. However, what seems to be more correct with the evidences is that the 100,000 is applicable anywhere in Mecca, not just the masjid itself. Because we know the Prophet ﷺ was taken on the night journey, and he ﷺ was not inside the masjid. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Subhana alladhi asra bi abdihi laylan min al-masjid al-haram. Even though the Prophet ﷺ was not inside the masjid itself, he was outside it. For this reason, many of the scholars have said that the entire of Makkah, the Haram, you can find the reward of 100,000 salah. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So if a person between the Umrah and the Hajj, they should offer their salah in jama'ah as much as they can. And try to be inside the masjid, no doubt, that has its own virtue. Wallahu a'lam.
Can he actually leave Mecca? For example, go visit Medina, for example, or is he confined when we're speaking about Hajj al-Tamattu?
Yeah.
Or is he confined to Mecca?
Good question. Right. So let's say that a person arrives very early to perform their Umrah and Hajj. He wants to perform Tamattu. He arrives or she arrives and they perform their Umrah. There's a month to Hajj. I have the opportunity to go to Mecca. Medina, my apologies. They have the opportunity to go to Medina, that's right. If they do that, they go to Medina and they spend some time there, they would be required to then perform Umrah for Tamattu again, because they left the Haram area. Okay, so they would then go to Medina from Dhul Hulayfa, or the place where you assume your ihram from the people of Medina. You leave there, and then when you arrive in Makkah, you perform your Umrah again, and then you perform your Hajj after that. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala.
Shaykhna, jazakumullah khairan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless you and your family and your time for joining us here and sharing with us this beneficial knowledge. Allahumma ameen. Dear viewers, jazakumullah khairan for joining us this episode as we learned the different types of Hajj and the benefits and the differences and the similarities between the different types and what's better, what's not better, and they're all good, well, inshallah ta'ala. Join us next episode as we continue this journey of Hajj and the Fiqh of Hajj. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.